Hi, this is Judy Zare, and I'm a master trainer with Emotional Brain Training. I have been doing this work for probably about 20 years now, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk with you about attachment theory and how it relates to emotional brain training. It's a very important topic because if you think about it, we're rewiring our brains for secure attachment. So I'm going to be talking about what that means, why it's important, and basically look at that neurobiology of attachment theory. Got a slideshow, kind of a PowerPoint presentation to go with this. Hopefully you have those right by your side. My laptop is down here, so I'll be looking down here periodically. And why don't we just get started? So, definition of attachment. This first slide refers to John Bowlby, who's considered to be the grandfather of attachment theory. He was the first one to actually recognize that there's a relationship that is kind of what he calls an enduring emotional tie between a primary caregiver and a child. And he started to recognize just how important that very early relationship is for the long-term well-being of the child. And we all have John Bowlby to thank for absolutely revolutionizing how we raise our young. He did his work in London way back in like the 50s and 60s. And prior to John Bowlby, we really operated with the Freudian drive theory. Very different theory, and I just have one brief example from my own personal life about why this is so meaningful. So when I was little, probably about two-ish, maybe 1.5, 2, I got some terrible illness that they didn't know what it was. It was undiagnosable. Took me to the hospital. In those days, my mother was she dropped me off, handed me over, and she left. And I was in the hospital for a couple weeks, and sure, my family would visit me, but I was kind of on my own there, 18 to 24 months in a hospital setting. Well, what we know about neural circuits and neurobiology now, that is not going to necessarily help this young child grow up to be a securely attached young child. Let me fast forward now to my own son, my child, so we're looking at, 30 years later. When he was young, about 18 months, contracted an illness, and I took him to urgency care, and we kind of rushed him over to the hospital. He was admitted to the hospital. I spent every single moment with my son. I slept in his room. The nurses set it up so that I was at bed. It was kind of an expectation, actually. It was totally understandable that a mother would want to do that, and the hospital completely supported me to do that. I could sleep in the bed with my child when that was appropriate. I could sleep right by his side when that was more appropriate because of his medication, etc. So we've changed a lot in the way that we're raising our young, and it's based on John Bowlby and attachment theory, and it's a good thing, and hopefully we'll continue to evolve as a species in that direction, because when we start to study the neurobiology of attachment, we realize just how important those primary, especially those first 3 years, are to really raising adults that will have almost like an inoculation to help them with the stressors of modern life. So good old John Bowlby, we thank him for first noticing. He was a psychiatrist. He first noticed that this caregiver relationship was fundamental to all aspects of the well-being of the child. Interestingly enough, back then we just didn't have the technology to study the brain. We didn't know the neuroscience behind it, but we had all this observational data that started to roll in about just how important that relationship is. So the next slide, I include this slide because look at those lovely animals. Those are all examples of mammals, and really social mammals. Look at the connection there. When we're talking about attachment theory, and by the way, I'll use that terminology, attachment theory, it's kind of an older language. We're looking at it now as, for instance, Dan Siegel's idea of interpersonal neurobiology. Interpersonal neurobiology, the way the brain, and it's not only human, it's social mammals, like in this picture, but the way the brains kind of co-regulate each other. So it's an interpersonal neurobiology. We do not stand alone when it comes to our neurobiology. We are in connection and we are in relationship, and it impacts our brain. So it's interpersonal neurobiology, or Porges languaging of it, the social engagement system. You know, there's different ways that we're languaging this idea of attachment theory. I'm going to use attachment theory just because it kind of simplifies it. So the photos of other mammals and everything that we learn about the human brain really started from studying learning theory, animal learning theory, and we share this with other species. So for me, that's a very important piece and perspective, that we've got a social mammalian brain, and we're looking at designing, and EBT is such a great intervention, really designed to maximize this kind of social mammalian brain, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The next slide is one of my favorite old-time studies that probably many of you are familiar with, the Harry Harlow work, and you can YouTube this, and it's absolutely fascinating. Way back when, in the 50s, in fact, it was Harry Harlow's work that really informed John Bowlby. And Harry Harlow, you probably are familiar with this. It's such a classic study. He took infant monkeys away from their moms. So the monkey and the baby monkey, brand newborns basically, and their mom were in a cage. He would take the baby monkey away from its mom, and then he'd reintroduce it into a cage, and in that cage would be two artificial moms. One would be a mom, they both were kind of doll moms. One would be a mom that was a wire mom with a nursing apparatus so the monkey could go and get milk, get food, and the other was a cloth mom. And why this was so interesting of a study is because, of course, the baby would go into the cage and immediately go to one of these mom figures, but it would invariably choose the cloth mom, and in fact would be almost repelled by the wire monkey, and only would go over there when it was going to eat. And the reason why this was such an important study is that prior to this, again, we were looking at Freud with drive theory, and the thought was that, food and sex and with these primitive drives is what really motivates the human animal. And of course, what Harry Harlow started to discover is that it's not really a drive for food, it's a drive for, in his language, is contact comfort, a relationship, a relational comfort that is primary, that is more primary than even that drive for food. And let me go to that next slide because it kind of summarizes Harry Harlow's finding. Again, contact comfort, more powerful than food. All social mammals have this drive, so all social mammals will have that drive for touch, for comfort, for connection, that will come before any other drive. And the absence, and here's a key component, because what Harry Harlow found was that as these monkeys grew up, the monkeys, who first of all, some monkeys didn't have a cloth mom in the cage at all. And the monkeys who had not even a cloth mom were the monkeys that had the most long-term kind of psychological, if you can consider psychological when you come to monkeys, but long-term, really it's neurobiological is what we know now, impact, negative impact. They were the least kind of mentally healthy when it comes to adulthood. They suffered, when they didn't have that contact comfort, and they suffered for their entire lifetime. So basically, this third point, the absence of this contact comfort or emotional connection creates psychological and physiological distress throughout the lifespan. Now again, we didn't have the ways of looking into the brain, and we didn't have the same understanding of the body's systems that we've learned about now, that you've heard Mary Dahlman talk about and Igor talk about, and we know so much more now that we'll be taking a look at that. But this is some of the history of this idea of what's important here. What is this attachment all about?